Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And I'm Alan Singer.
And we're missing our compatriot, Raymond Peterson, who has a medical appointment, so he can't be with us. But this is Media Watch being done the back end of 2024. When you see this, it means you will have survived to make it into the new year of 2025, and wish all of you a happy new year. This is being brought to you by EVT Educational Productions, Zoom, and may show up on Manhattan Neighborhood Network at some point. We're not quite sure these days. But just at the back end of 2024, a compatriot, colleague, friend of Ray Peterson's and mine, cameraman by the name of Tony Hirashiki, that's Yasutsune Hirashiki, with whom we call Tony, passed away. He's approximately my age, mid-80s, one of the greatest cameramen of all time. Matter of fact, he did the book about his time in Vietnam, which I believe we spoke on Media Watch back when it first came out. Let's see if I can get it into the camera frame one way or another. On the front lines of the television war. And it's an excellent book about being on the front lines, covering that war that, because of television, was brought into everybody's home in the United States of America, if not around the globe, almost every evening. And Tony was definitely on the front lines. One of the greatest human beings that I ever met, ever knew, and was pleased to call a friend. I'm not sure if I could bring up my desktop. I'm not sure how to do that these days. It's been a while since I did that. Bob, what do I have to do? Go to share screen or?
Yeah, you need to go to share screen and then pick the desktop. But yeah, back then, ABC was, of course, in the battle with CBS and NBC. And in the early days, ABC was the also ran. It was the one that trailed the other two networks. And when you and your friend were there, you basically, even the plane, ABC became a big player. And it was on account of people like this, the talent like this, your friend, that made it possible.
That's actually a shot of the back cover of the book. That's a shot of Tony right there on the front lines in whatever location he was. That particular still is probably covering up. Are you seeing that guy to the left? That's actually Steve Bell in a two-shot with Tony, which I don't know if I could bring that up. See if I can get another image of Tony. That's Tony with Jean-Claude Mallet, another correspondent, in one of those frontline scenes out there, wherever, Interestingly enough, the tributes just keep pouring in for Tony Hirashiki. And we've lost a great human being on the planet, one of the kindest, most gentle, and most proficient, phenomenal cameraman of all time. But Tony was not the only one who passed at the back end, Bob. Greg Gumble, right?
Sure, Greg Gumble, well-noted TV journalist, especially for his sports reporting, the one and only African American to call a Super Bowl, among his other accolades. Yes, he was the older brother of Bryant Gumble, who has his own accolades in journalism.
Correct. And then a guy who is just definitely one of the greatest trailblazers to ever cross the planet, the savior of any number of corporate entities, one of the major players in corporate America, Richard Parsons. Bob, I know you crossed paths with him at least once.
Yes, Richard Parsons, I guess you can call him a serial CEO, because he always turned up in places that needed him, like at Time Warner and AOL, when those two companies merged quite disastrously, actually. And he was called upon to basically right the ship, which he did to a great extent. at that point, they were bleeding money and bleeding. Their reputation was sinking because of this merger, and Richard Parsons was brought in to help things happen. Richard also served as the CEO of the Los Angeles Clippers of the NBA after the Clippers jettisoned the racist owner, Mr. Sterling, after some comments that he made. So Richard has been in a lot of situations that needed him, and I was happy to run into him at his restaurant next to Minton's in Harlem.
The Cecil Hotel when they resurrected the Cecil and Minton's. Yes.
Yes, and I knew him. I'm a tech reporter, as you know, and I would see him at multiple events, but I didn't think he knew me. But when I walked into that place, he got up from where he was sitting to greet me at the door. So I have quite the high level of respect for Richard Parsons, and personally and professionally, I'll miss him.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, we wanted to mention Sugar Pie DeSanto. It's funny, I'm a big fan of 50s and 60s blues, and I had not heard of her. She kind of disappeared. But Sugar Pie was actually born in Brooklyn, moved to the West Coast. She later recorded for Chess Records in Chicago, and she performed with James Brown and Etta James. So in the early 60s, she was one of the top rhythm and blues singers.
I totally slept her. I'm going to have to go back and look her up just to pin down what I missed by not paying closer attention. But we before we were even thinking of doing these obits on these major figures, major and minor, enough stuff came into our inbox about journalists being destroyed across the planet. I guess we could talk about Haiti initially, but actually what I saw after we saw the Haitian thing, and I got to tip of the hat again to Richard Prince Journalisms, because he's the one that pushed to the forefront of my consciousness what's going on with those journalists in Haiti. But I saw a story a day after I saw Prince's lead about this person out in Colorado somewhere who followed this US television reporter who was working for a station out there somewhere. I forget which town it was in Colorado, Bob. I'm not sure if you've got that link that you'd call up the town, but this guy was covering a story, and then he wrapped up the coverage and he's getting ready to go back to the station, and he's driving back and he realized that somebody's chasing him, following him. Pick up that tail, Bob. This is just crazy.
Yes, I mean, he's a reporter for the station. This happened in Colorado, and the reporter worked for KKCO and KJCT. His name is Jaron Alex, and a Pacific Islander, as you said. And this person, I'll spare you the name of the suspect. We don't need to give him any notoriety. Basically, didn't think that the reporter looked like an American, and decided to take it upon himself to follow the news truck after this reporter had wrapped up a story, all the way, like 40 miles, all the way back to the station. And when the reporter tried to get out and enter the office building, this person choked him and tried to and assaulted him, and he had to be saved by his coworkers. And the suspect shouted during this melee, "This is Trump's America now." Basically, this idiot was decided to lay his own law down on the situation. An assault on an American reporter by an American. So yes, Eric, we have to be worried about ourselves here in this country, in addition to what's happening in and we're about to go into it, Haiti, Gaza, and other places worldwide.
Yeah, Richard Prince's link really called out the fact that not only are the gangs shooting and killing reporters trying to cover what's going on in Haiti, but they're also under fire from the local police. And so the reporters in Haiti are getting it from both ends. And so, I mean, there's been any number of high profile killings of journalists across the globe. We know that they're now trying to bring Assad to account for all the journalists that he killed during the Syrian uprising. But it's still just as bad. It's still going on. Besides Haiti, you go back to the Middle East, next door to Assad's craziness. What was the latest report we saw, Alan, about what was going on in Gaza?
Well, the estimate now is 221 journalists have been murdered between October 27th and December 26th by the Israeli forces. The most recent one was 5 journalists were killed when their car, which was marked, was attacked by Israelis. Now, the Times actually finally has begin to address this, I think, in a serious way. They had a year-end roundup of significant people who had died during the year. And one of the people they featured was a woman named Afa al-Udani, age 39. She was a commentator for Palestine Chronicle TV. In September, an Israeli airstrike destroyed her home, killing her, her husband, a 5-year-old daughter, and a 7-month-old son. 2 other young children survived. And, you know, Israel, it was just released. They've been using AI to target people. And originally, you know, there were some guidelines on who and what would be attacked and what was acceptable civilian casualty. Now 20, 30 people has become acceptable civilian casualty for the Israeli Defense Force. And, you know, in Haiti, but the United States, in Gaza, journalists aren't safe because they expose what's going on.
I've really had it. I mean, I try every time I hear one of these stories. Now, in Haiti, a gang member has apparently taken responsibility for killing the journalist. He said that, and it was at an event where they reopened a hospital, correct? And the gang member said, the gang leader said, we attacked them because they did not have our permission to reopen. That just shows the extreme arrogance, and evil is the only word I can apply to this. Just pure evil. And you know, how do you battle that? In Gaza, the last number of casualties was 5 journalists, correct, Alan? And here again, it was marked, and the IDF excuse was they were terrorists. And here again, they were not. So the excuses aren't there, but the deaths keep coming, and I just sit here flabbergasted and disappointed. That's, you know, it's one of the great personal disappointments of 2024 for me, just watching the toll of journalists rise.
Now, the story about Colorado, I think, is also important because Donald Trump has attacked the journalists and attacked the media as enemies of the people. And he's launched nuisance suits to try to really get them to self-censor. And it's very, very scary because he's empowering crazies like that guy in Colorado to really hurt people and prevent reporters from telling the truth about what's going on in this country.
This is what Cornell at Columbia J School was talking about. How they target journalists, how dictators target journalists to try to get people to back off. And as Alan was saying, self-censor. It becomes more than self-censor, actually cower and kowtow to the powers that be. And so as Media Watch and as practicing journalists and as observers of what's going on in the totality of the global community about a free press, we're going to have to just keep speaking out and keep calling this stuff out every day as often as possible and do the best we can to keep, what is that tired phrase that still rises up? Speak truth to power. Well, we're talking about speaking truth to autocracy, not just power. So, but this brings us basically to what's actually going on in Gaza. I saw a report where one of Benjamin Netanyahu's former advisors, maybe current advisors, actually said he does not believe Netanyahu is trying to broker a peace treaty between him and the people in Gaza now, because he's waiting for Donald Trump to come in. because he thinks he's going to get more concessions from the people in Gaza and the Palestinians because he's going to have Donald Trump at his back to rubber stamp anything he wants. I'm not, that doesn't surprise me, because my take was that Benjamin Netanyahu had written off all those hostages a long time ago. And that's why he was just bombing indiscriminately. I say he's bombing indiscriminately. You're talking about them using AI to supposedly target what's acceptable civilian death. I don't think they're even using anything. I just think this is a campaign of destruction. This is me looking at what's been going on, using my 50 plus years of journalistic assessment to say that this is an annihilation campaign, if not necessarily of all the people, of all the infrastructure, to destroy that area, period. Correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm on a soapbox.
No, look, Israel has not negotiated in good faith. It's very clear that every time we hear that they're close to an agreement, Israel raises new conditions to torpedo the negotiation. And one of the things that's happening in Israel is there are immense protests against the Netanyahu government because the people there are aware that he is torpedoing the negotiations, and the hostages will not return. I mean, these are war crimes, and they are bordering, if not over the line of genocide. This has become acceptable in the United States is very distressing. And as you said, the Trump has promised to double down on this.
I think you enumerated it in a previous show, Alan. You talked about all of the universities that had been destroyed, the courthouses, the roads, the pipes, the electricity, the connectivity. There's literally nothing left in Gaza. If you wanted to start a new government today, let's say a peace process sort of somehow bubbled up today, there's basically nothing to rebuild. You build is what you can do. It's been flattened. And so, yes, and Netanyahu has proven over and over again that he doesn't care. To get to allegedly a terrorist here and a terrorist there, he's willing to take out 2 apartment buildings.
Sunday, the American Historical Association is meeting in New York City. And a group that I'm part of, Historians for Peace and Justice, has a motion on the floor condemning scholasticide in Gaza, the destruction of universities and destruction of K-12 education. They no longer exist. And even people who survive, they're condemned. Their culture is destroyed, education is destroyed, the future is destroyed there.
Yeah. I keep trying to not harp on Netanyahu and Israel just because Hamas actually figured this and probably is doing what they're doing, hiding behind civilians, hiding in infrastructure. And so it puts the Israelis in a bad position. But I don't think there's been any proof that bombing the hell out of any of these locations is going to come forward to a lasting peace. And so what I'm looking at, another assessment from 50 years of looking at geopolitical stuff as a journalist and as a former military person, is I see laying the seeds for another generation of terrorists that will continually attack Israel based on Israel's actions in the last 12, 13, 14 months of responding to Hamas's terrorist attack. I might be misinterpreting, but watching stuff like this play out for the last 50 years, hate breeds hate. Destruction breeds destruction. Jimmy Carter was smart when he decided he was going to bring Egypt and Israel to the bargaining table at Camp David as one of the first things of his presidency. And Alan, I know we want to talk about Jimmy Carter. I don't know how much time we have left, and maybe the way we segue to Jimmy Carter is to talk about the Camp David Accords that Jimmy Carter actually, after how many different wars, Jimmy Carter brought Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat. Memory says those are the correct names for those leaders of Egypt and Israel to Camp David, and they sat down and they hammered out what was they called, the Camp David Accords or the Camp David whatever. But historically, tell us how that framework was the best positive move towards making peace in the Middle East that's since been torpedoed, primarily by Netanyahu and a bunch of other folks. But
well, in the 67 war between Israel and its Arab neighbors, Israel seized Egyptian territory, Sinai and Gaza. And in 73, Israelite troops actually made it to the Suez Canal, so they later withdrew. So there's repeated wars between Egypt and Israel. And what Jimmy Carter was able to do was to bring the leaders of the two countries together. And what they did was Israel returned the Sinai to Egypt in exchange for normalizing relationships between the two countries. And that then became the model for other settlements in the Middle East. Carter's a very interesting guy. He actually got a Nobel Peace Prize, but not just for that. I always consider him one of our greatest post-presidents. You know, he wasn't that an effective politician while he was president, and that kind of, he didn't get reelected as a result. But after his presidency, he was primarily responsible for the development of Habitat for Humanity, and he built housing for people all over the world. He helped to eliminate the parasite ghetto worm disease by delivering water filters all over the infested areas in Africa. And when there was civil war in Sudan, he actually negotiated a ceasefire so they could deliver the water filters to that region. So we're talking about an exceptional person. You know, again, his presidency he was not successful in many ways. But one of the things I always remember why he didn't get reelected is because there was a fuel crisis in the United States because of an OPEC boycott. And gas prices were skyrocketing. There was not enough oil for heat. There were lines at the gas stations. And Jimmy Carter suggested we should all wear cardigan sweaters as a response. People went nuts. He also lowered the speed limit to 55, and no one liked that one. At any rate, January 9th will be a presidential day of mourning for Jimmy Carter. It's a presidential decree made by President Biden. There was no law that establishes a day of mourning for a former president. It's done by the president who's sitting. The first presidential decree, a day of mourning, was for Thomas Jefferson in 1826. But after that, the presidential days of mourning were reserved for presidents who died in office. Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, William McKinley, and John F. Kennedy were assassinated while in office. So there was a presidential day of mourning for them. And Warren G. Harding and FDR died of natural causes while in office. Presidential day of mourning for them. When Dwight Eisenhower died, President Richard Nixon established a precedent that there would be a presidential day of mourning for any former president who died. Though ironically, there was one president who didn't get a day of mourning, and that was Richard Nixon.
I mean, when Jimmy Carter was elected, basically in that year, any Democrat was going to get elected.
Yeah.
Because it came right after the Watergate, right after Nixon, right after Ford pardoned Nixon. So whoever topped out the Democratic nomination was going to get elected that year. And the best way to get elected was to be as far from politics as possible, and that was Jimmy Carter. And the reason he lost is because you weren't going to defeat the electric personality of movie star Ronald Reagan. And as you said, it was a bad presidency for multiple reasons, including the gas prices, et cetera. So,
well, But I'm not, you're right about it being, quote, a bad presidency in effect. But actually, I don't think Jimmy Carter was a bad president.
No, I agree. I liked him as president
Yeah, no,
personally. But go ahead, Eric. Go ahead. We have about 2 minutes left. Go ahead.
yeah. In the 2 minutes, let me real quick, like, say why I think Carter got a bad rap. The Iran hostage situation occurred on his watch. The Nicaragua Sandinista stuff occurred on his watch. But I think he handled the Sandinista crisis quite well. I believe he's the one who said we're no longer supporting those dictatorships and those crazy people in there, and we're going to stop propping up those kinds of dictators, and we're going to put human rights and the stress on human rights as a functioning part of our presidency. And he actually followed through on that. Because of the Iran-Contra thing, and to this day I swear that Ronald Reagan and his people colluded with Ayatollah Khomeini and his people to not release those hostages until after Carter left office. And I believe there's documentation to that effect, people just keeping it under wraps. So he never got credit for getting those hostages home. He got blamed for the failed helicopter crash when they tried to rescue those hostages. But one of the key things that people forget, that Jimmy Carter, and I'm quoting, I think Eisenstadt, one of his chief people in his administration, Carter began by trying to make the government more representative of the American people. Eisenstadt recalled that Carter appointed more women, Black Americans, and Jewish Americans to official positions and judgeships than all 38 of his predecessors combined.
Wow.
And so what he did was to try to make the American government reflective of the American people. And he succeeded in doing that. And all those other things that torpedoes his presidency, that could have happened to any other president. And then if you have your incoming guy colluding with your enemy to make sure you look bad, you're definitely going to look bad. That's my take on Jimmy Carter and his presidency.
And very well timed, because we're just about out.
Okay, well, this has been Media Watch, folks. Jimmy Carter is going to lie in state January 9th, I believe. That's going to be the day. I'm not sure exactly when the funeral is going to be, but that's going to be published all over the rest of the media, so folks, you know all about it. Thank you for joining us. I'm Eric Tait. This has been Media Watch.
Alan Singer.
And I'm Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
And we'll catch you the next time, folks. Stay safe.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to one and all.